Alright, this video is going to instruct you on how to solder um, well, and kind of teach you a little bit about the soldering station and iron that we have here. This is a Weller soldering station. We have our soldering iron here. We'll start with this. The first thing you want to do is, well, it should be off. Nothing should be plugged in. It should be cool. And you can tell just by holding your hand near it. Don't touch it unless you know it's not been on for a while, but you can feel if the heat's radiating from it. This one has been off. I just pulled it out of the cabinet. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that the tip of the iron is actually seated and locked in place. There's a set screw on the side that you can tighten. You can actually change the tip if you want to. Use the tip that's appropriate for the job. We typically have these fine tipped irons because we do little soldering work on printed circuit boards, so that's what we want as a nice thin tip for it. This all gets hot, so our hands should never touch anything beyond this foam handle on the iron. Whenever we're not using the iron needs to go back into here. We place it into there gently. We don't want to throw it in. We don't want to, bring it up, because if this gets caught on these little metal pieces here, it's going to bend the tip. This bends fairly easily, so you need to be gentle, you need to be careful, pay attention to what you're doing as you put it back into the stand. This is a variable heat unit, so when I turn it on, I can actually adjust the potentiometer here to change from 0 or from 1 to 5. The solder that we typically use is around 4 is a good starting point, and you can lower it or heat it up depending on how quickly it melts the solder. So that's kind of a good place to start. The first thing you want to do after you've done that, or the next thing, is you want to check the cord. You want to make sure that there's no frays. You want to make sure that there's no burn marks with exposed wire, because sometimes that happens. It shouldn't happen if you're paying attention, but we understand that students, so for example right there, that's where the iron has actually touched the cord. There's no exposed wire there, so that's okay. If that was exposed wire, we want to put some electrical tape over that, or heat shrink tubing to cover that up. So you want to check your cable or your cord. Also make sure it's not twisted. A lot of times this will get quite twisted, and then make sure it's flat, and so it's kind of, you can kind of see that this one's nice and flat here in front of me. Make sure you have plenty of workspace. You should be doing your soldering on a bench that is not really going to burn. So a wood tabletop is okay, because we're not going to leave an iron down on it like this. But you don't want something that's laminate. If you put a hot iron on something that's laminate, it's going to melt it. So you don't want to do that. So typically on a stone tabletop would even probably be the best for that, which is the kind of tabletops up in our science labs. But a wood table surface would be okay. Just be careful. It does get hot. You can be burned. You want to take care of the equipment. I'm going to show you some things on this machine that I'm not happy about, just so you can know not to do it. This is metal. It gets hot. This is plastic. And when you touch hot metal to plastic, it does melt. So we should never take our soldering iron, just be touching like parts of the plastic or doing that. That's abuse to the equipment, and unacceptable. We do have a sponge that's in here, so we want to remove the sponge, and we want to take it out, and we want to make the sponge damp. So we actually want to get it wet, pretty saturated, and just wring it out. But this is a damp sponge. It's not soppy. It's damp. We're going to use this, and if you notice there's little lines on it, we're going to take our iron when it's hot, and we're going to streak it through these little slits, and that's going to clean the tip of our iron off from the solder. Okay, once you have everything set up and you're ready to go, a couple other things for you is I'm going to be soldering this LED onto this board. I want to get my roll of solder, and I usually pull about a foot of solder off the roll. And then once it gets down to about 1.5 inches or so, then I'm just going to throw the rest away. I just don't want to get my fingers much closer than that when I'm holding the iron. I typically hold the iron in my left hand and then use my right hand to control the solder and the amount of solder that's going in. A couple of other tools that come in handy. One is a desolder pump. So this right here is a desolder pump. It's really easy to use. You just press on the plunger and it locks in place, and then once you heat up the solder, you then place the tip over the solder and then push the button here, and it creates a vacuum and it pulls the solder up into the nozzle here, and to eject it you just again push the black plunger and it pops it right out. So this comes in handy if you need to desolder, if you mess something up, a desolder pump. Another thing that helps out quite a bit is this helping hands. So if you don't have somebody to help you with your soldering, you can use this. It's kind of nice. You can clip pieces to it to hold it in place, and then if you need to hold your part in place as it's tipped over or whatever, you can kind of use the helping hands to kind of arrange and adjust. It's fully adjustable. You have little wing nuts and things that you can loosen to move it around and retighten them. It has a magnifying lens on it as well, so you can see what you're doing, check your solder joints and things with that. But this is kind of nice if you kind of struggle holding your items. I'm not going to use this though. When you're ready to get started, and you have your solder, you have your soldering iron, you have your parts and pieces, you want to make sure that you solder them in the appropriate spots, and some things to kind of help. So let's say we're going to solder this LED in position. LEDs are polar devices, so they have a positive and negative side, and we have legs that are different sizes that kind of help us with that. Also, if we look on the internals of this, let's see if I can zoom in here. Let's try something different. Let's try to zoom to this. Still not very good. Try one more time. That's okay. If we look on the inside, there's actually two different sides of the LED. So if you had one of these in person, you could actually see inside of those and see the two electrodes that are on the inside. One is the negative electrode, one's the positive electrode. It's a little better view of it right there. You can kind of see the metal that comes up and over, and then the one that comes straight up. So the cathode is the one that comes up and over, and then the anode is the one that's straight up and down. So the cathode is the negative side, and it always has the shorter lead of the two. So when you look at them, and if you happen to clip them off before you know which one is which, you can just look at the internals and see which side is the cathode and which side is the anode from there. So I'm going to put, the cathode typically also has a flat side on it, but these little 3mm ones don't have a flat side on the actual casing. So on this edge right here, there's a little lip on there, and that lip would have a flat on it on the larger 5mm ones, but this one doesn't. So I'm going to put this in, and then to hold it in position, I'm actually just going to bend the leads, just spread them out, just like that. So that way it holds it where it needs to go. And here's kind of the order in which you solder. So it's just kind of a 4-step progression on the way you solder. I'm going to kind of move my camera here. Oops. Didn't mean to take a picture, but okay. So if I have my iron, I'm actually going to put my iron in my right hand and a solder in my left. So I'm going to do iron on. So I want to heat up the material, and so I want to heat up everything the solder is going to be attached to. Then I'm going to put solder on, add the solder, solder off, and then iron off. So iron on, solder off, iron off. And it's basically in that tempo. A lot of times students will pull the iron off too quickly, and they don't let the heat fuse the solder to all the electrical components. So just hold it on there for a bit, and I'll give you some examples here when I do these two. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my iron, so we'll be back in just a second. Okay, my iron is currently warmed up. So the first thing you want to do is you want to clean the tip of the iron, and you want to also tin the tip. So we're going to just put a little bit of solder on the tip, and then we're going to wipe it off into the sponge. And that should make it so it's nice and silvery looking. That's tinning the tip. And then when we look at our item here, I'm going to kind of zoom in so you can see it a little better view. So again, I'm going to do iron on. So I'm going to heat up the material, and then solder on. Just kind of work the solder around, and then solder off, and then iron off. See how long I left the iron on there? Again, so it fuses that solder to all the electrical components. So again, iron on, solder off, and then iron off. And your goal is to have shiny Hershey Kiss shaped solder joints. So if you notice here, those look nice and Hershey Kiss. That was already broken, by the way. But they should make nice Hershey Kiss shaped pieces right there. And then the last thing you want to do is you want to clip off the ends of these leads. So just use some diagonal cutters. Make sure you get nice and close to the solder joint down there, and then hold this lead. If you don't, it's going to fly off and it might hit somebody. So just be careful of that. You hold on to this as you clip it away. But that's how you solder, and it just takes some practice, but it's a pretty easy skill once you get going. So if you have any questions, let me know.